Hello tankers, I'm your instructor. Today we'll talk about shooting. Here they are, these beauties. The cannons, a tank's main feature, without which it'd only be an armored car at best. But a gun's caliber means nothing unless you know how to use it. Let's cover the most important terms and mechanics first. Accuracy. To improve your chances of hitting your target, stop and wait until the dispersion circle is as small as possible. Remember that a shell can go anywhere in the circle. Sometimes it can also fly beyond the circle's borders. This happens due to a lag between the game client and the server.
Over 100-degree high temperature.
And your game client, you may have already turned to your target, but on the server, you're still turning. To minimize this delay, you can enable server reticle in the settings. It's not as smooth, but it shows the actual situation on the server. The aiming circle grows upon firing, on the move, and during hull and turret traverse. How big the aiming circle is when you're not fully aimed is called stabilization. To lock onto targets while you're on the move, use auto-aim. It's hard to hit a target you can't see. If a target is beyond your view range circle, you won't be able to spot it yourself. If it's beyond the draw circle, you won't see it even if your allies can. Different guns and shells have different armor penetration. Enable the penetration marker in the game settings. It's an invaluable tool for new players. The marker will show the most likely result of your shot. Remember that there's a range of plus minus 25% to damage and penetration. Two identical shots can give different results. Shell trajectory is calculated automatically by a ballistic calculator, so you don't need to raise your gun. But when your target is moving, it's best not to use auto-aim. To lock onto targets while you're on the move, use auto-aim. Aim manually and consider the velocity of the shell you're using. It often depends on one of the 4 shell types. Armor-piercing shells usually have good velocity. They penetrate obstacles and screens well. However, they lose penetration value over distance and can bounce off armor when hitting it at acute angles. But they have the best normalization of all shell types. Normalization is the shell's ability to turn a few degrees toward a vehicle's armor when hitting it. This way, the impact angle becomes better and effective armor is reduced. APCR shells usually have the best velocity. They also penetrate obstacles and screens. Upon contact with armor, they also normalize, but to a smaller degree than AP shells. Their main disadvantages are that they lose a lot of penetration power over distance and ricochet at more acute angles. This means they're not the best choice for firing at well-sloped armor. This is where heat shells come in handy. They almost never ricochet and usually have good penetration. They don't lose penetration power at a distance.
But they usually have worse
velocity than APCR and AP shells. The drawbacks of heat shells are that they don't normalize and are worse at dealing with screens or obstacles. This is due to their explosive effect. High explosive shells cause devastating damage, but usually penetrate armor very poorly. They don't lose penetration power over distance. HE shells don't normalize, but they never bounce off either. They cause minor damage even without penetration. The damage caused depends on the effective armor at the impact point. You shouldn't rely on them though. It's better to penetrate the enemy's armor with another shell and save your HE shells for a thin target.
Woo! HE is useful, boys. Bring HE rounds. You will not regret it.
Overall, AP shells are effective and versatile. APCR shells travel fast but often ricochet. Heat shells almost never ricochet, but are ineffective against obstacles and screens. HE shells are the most niche use case, and usually for targets with very thin armor. Different tanks can have completely different shell loadouts, but for all vehicles, the first shell is an affordable standard one. The second is a more expensive special round with improved characteristics, and the third is a high explosive shell. You can change their order for a particular vehicle in your garage. You can also do this. If it's armored, pick a weak spot. At the front, that's usually the lower glacis plate, driver's hatch, commander's cupola, and so on. Sometimes it can even be the gun mantlet. When you're starting out, use the penetration indicator, but also try to learn and memorize the armor layout of various vehicles. Use the penetration indicator, but also try to learn and memorize the armor layout of various vehicles. In addition to aiming at weak spots, you can change your direction of attack. Even tough nuts are much easier to crack from the side or rear. And if you're much higher than your opponent, try to penetrate their roof. Remember that some vehicles don't have any serious armor. For example, light tanks are harder to land a hit on than to penetrate. It's useful to remember the layout of internal modules in enemy vehicles. Aiming at their fuel tanks, engine, and ammo rack will give you an advantage. Your chance of taking out an internal module depends on how much damage you cause it. You can find more information about module layout with the help of the World of Tanks community. External modules can also be disabled. Experienced tankers often immobilize enemy vehicles by shooting at their front or rear drive wheel or idler. Keep in mind that, after hitting an external module, shells keep on traveling and can penetrate the vehicle's main armor if they overlap. That's why shooting at a drive wheel doesn't do any damage from head-on, but can from the side. If the cost of the shot is high, it's better to knock off tracks with damage. In all other cases, destroy tracks even without causing damage. Immobilizing the enemy is very useful. Remember that tracks work as screens, also known as spaced armor. Other perks can improve stabilization, shell velocity, and many other gun parameters. Try them all. It's useful, but it can't be equipped on many low-tier vehicles or any tank destroyers. Enhanced Gun Laying Drive is useful for tank destroyers that can't use the stabilizer. Improved aiming makes the dispersion circle slightly smaller, both on the move and when fully aimed. It's useful for certain tank destroyers and snipers shooting from a distance. So, we know how to shoot and what to shoot with. We're loaded and ready for battle. But if there are multiple targets in battle, who do you shoot first? If you have a high caliber, sometimes it's better to cause more damage, but only if you're sure that the one-shot enemy won't run away and become a nuisance for you or your team. But if you see a full HP heavy right in front of you and a light tank with HP for one shot running away a little further off, weigh up your chances of hitting the priority target. Watch what other players do in your battles. Watch some streamers with good statistics. Memorize the best positions and don't be afraid to experiment. Remember that technically, the closer you are to the enemy, the more effective your fire will be. Get close, but not too close. Try to have cover and allies nearby, as well as a way to retreat. Monitor how the battle unfolds to attack or run away in time. A good position on the map is sometimes even more important than knowledge of weak spots and shooting mechanics. That's it for today. Show this video to your friends who are still hugging the red line and firing HE shells at the upper glacis. In the next episode, we'll talk about armor and damage blocking. See you soon.